Okay, hi. So I am Liz Engler-Chiurazzi. I am a faculty in the Tulane Brain Institute and also the Department of Neurosurgery. I am so excited to have all of you here. We are really looking forward to getting to talk to you today a little bit about the topic of our session, which is neuroscience education, community engagement, social embeddedness, and the importance of enhancing diverse perspectives within the scientific enterprise. And I can think of no better people to speak to you about that than those assembled here. So we're going to start by giving each of these folks a chance to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about how they got into science and what their journey is so far. And then really, the most important thing that we want you to take away from this is knowledge and ideas about how you can promote science literacy and STEM education in your own communities. And we really do want it to be a dialogue. And we want your suggestions for how we can do this better. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Boucher.
Hi, how's everyone doing today? My name's Leanne Boucher Gill. I'm a professor at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. A little bit hotter down there than here, but I'm loving the weather. I have been at Nova for 14 years now, and I've always been involved in sort of science outreach. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I really think that the brain is inherently interesting, okay? If you don't think the brain is interesting, then there's something wrong with your brain. You can quote me. But I really wanted to do some outreach, especially with children, and we'll talk about that, some of the marginalized groups. We don't see them at the higher levels doing research and studying of the brain, and that was really important for me to make an impact. So I have published a couple books about the brain, the Big Brain book, how it works and all its quirks, and a few other books, and just to let people know how amazing your brain is. So I'm going to turn it over.
Hi, I'm Brooke Sweeten. I also think the brain is inherently interesting, and decided to dedicate my career to studying it and all of its quirks, I guess, if we'll go that way. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at Tulane University in the Brain Institute in the Department of Cell and Molecular Biology. So I study brains at the cellular level. So I poke at brain tissue and see how it fires. I love the part of the brain where you can look at it as a circuit. So you can compare all of the parts of the brain as a way of measuring electrical activity. So the coolest thing I remember learning about the brain was that everything you do, think, say, feel is regulated by 4 different chemicals. And that's it. And so that's how we've developed the super complex organ, and I think it's the greatest thing ever. So.
Hi, I'm India Purcell. I am from Southeast Louisiana, from Slidell, just across Lake Pontchartrain. I'm a third-year graduate student within the Tulane Brain Institute. I work under the guise of Engler-Chiurazzi. We work on neuroimmunology, so the interaction between the immune system and neuroscience. I'm particularly interested in outreach and advocacy because at a young age of 57, my grandfather was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and my family moved in to be his caregivers. And so that kind of sparked my interest in neuroscience, as well as growing up from Louisiana, the STEM education could be improved upon and reach those communities that really need it.
Awesome. So just a few questions to get us rolling. How old were you, or in what level of education or grade in school were you when you first learned about the brain, the nervous system, the neuron, or really anything having to do with neuroscience?
That is a great question. I gotta be honest, I don't remember ever not knowing about the brain. I was a very curious child, so I would read lots of different books and I don't know, there's this thing in your head and it's squishy and it's about 3 pounds, and it makes you who you are. And so I honestly don't know, but the first time was probably in college when I studied it as part of my degree. And that's when I really learned that it's not just a big squishy thing, but that it's organized. There are maps all over the place. You were talking about circuits, and that there are these little things called neurons that are amazing cells that are much different than the boring skin cells or anything else. No offense to skin cells. But yeah, it's probably in college when I really took a course to study it.
Yeah, I think I was probably like late elementary school, early middle school when I really started thinking about the brain. So I came into this field as someone who has struggled with mental health and comes from a family that has struggled with mental health. So I always wanted to understand why your brain worked that way if it wasn't conducive to being a mentally healthy individual. But I didn't have an opportunity to study the brain itself until I took AP psychology my junior year of high school. And so that was really what got me excited about being able to study the brain and that you could have a career studying neuroscience and the brain and its different parts.
So I guess I was introduced via, tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, and that was kind of on my own. I was interested in those topics. In late high school, I did my senior project on that. But for formal training, it wasn't until graduate school that I actually took any neuroscience classes. I worked as a technician in a neuroscience lab, and that was like my first introduction and first time I actually saw a brain.
Awesome. Okay. When did you realize or decide that a career in science was something that you wanted to pursue?
I can very, very clearly remember this. I was taking a class in college, and my family are not academic, so I did not come from that business people. And I was taking this class where they were showing an illusion, a visual illusion. It's called sometimes the waterfall illusion or the motion after effect. And essentially what happens, I'll explain it in terms of the waterfall illusion. You're looking at motion going down in one direction. And then if you look just slightly off to the side, it looks like everything is moving up. Okay? And it all has to do with, again, these circuits in the brain about how we process motion information. Well, my professor had this machine, and we were looking at a spiral, and it was contracting. And he's like, all right, now stare at it, and then look at my head. And I love this man. He was a tall, bald gentleman. And when I looked at his head, it exploded. Okay, it went vroom. And that was the most amazing thing I had ever seen in my life. And I went up to him right after that class and I said, how can I have a career studying things like this? Because I didn't know it was an option. But I still remember the motion after effect. Look it up. It's amazing. I tell all my students about it. And it's just, it's a really good demonstration about how our behavior and our perceptions, when we study that, we can understand the underlying neural mechanisms. And you can learn just quite a lot about the brain without even opening it up. So it's pretty amazing.
That's really cool. I always wanted to be a scientist of some shape. I changed my mind a lot, and I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So, but I just remember as a kid, I was always trying to figure out how things worked, why things worked. I would build random things. I would take stuff apart, try to figure out how to put it back together. So I always wanted to figure out how things worked and why things worked. I wanted to be a veterinarian for a while. I love animals. I wanted to be a genetic counselor for a while. I thought that would be a cool job. And it wasn't until like my senior year of college where I had gotten into research and started doing a lot more of it. And I sat down with one of my professors and I was like, hey, how can I get your job? And they looked at me like I was a crazy person. They're like, you don't want to do this. I'm like, no, but I do. Like, I can't imagine having like a traditional 9-to-5 job where I'm not coming up with my own questions and then mapping out ways to figure out the answer to that question. Like every day that I come into the lab, I'm able to ask a new question that nobody knows the answer to and use the tools that I've learned over my career to then answer that question. So it's an opportunity that I absolutely love, and it's never boring and it's never the same thing twice.
I guess I knew probably in high school that I wanted to go into, well, I always liked science and I wanted to do something in that realm. Probably until my sophomore year of high school, that's really when I got super interested in neuroscience things, so like mental health, like you were touching on a little bit earlier, as well as just like neurodegeneration in general. So that kind of sparked my interest in research, and so moving forward, I got started really early in college doing stem cell research in regenerative medicine, and that kind of just set the path forward. I am a first-generation college student, so I just knew that I want to go to college, I want that higher degree, and I want to stay doing the bench work and working on those important issues that we have, but as well as still staying with the science communication to the general public, especially because I come from a family that doesn't have a science background at all. So communicating what I do in the lab or basic science topics is really important to me to allow my family to understand what I'm talking about.
That's awesome. I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. That was like right up until end of high school. That was my plan. So I love that others who made it into science had this long game idea. So this is great. Following up on India's point, though, my next question pertains to: were you surrounded on your journey at any stage by a community of people? Did you have role models that you could turn to in thinking about what does a scientist look like, what does a professor look like, that influenced you along the way?
Absolutely. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be connected with some professors early on in college, and then I went to a wonderful program. I had a wonderful mentor. And probably in grad school, that's when I started to realize that there weren't a lot of women especially in the neuroscience field. Again, the statistics will bear this out, that in college, mostly women, grad school, maybe about equal, postdoc, more men, and then as you go up the academic ladder, you see less and less women, and there's lots and lots of reasons for that. But it's important to me now to be a role model to my students and to let them know that, yeah, I'm a woman, but who cares? I'm a scientist, right? And so that's one of the reasons why, I wrote this book, is to let people know that it doesn't matter what you are. If you are genuinely interested in learning, there may be some roadblocks here and there along the way, but I was very fortunate to have some wonderful mentors, both male, female, people of color, as but I was very fortunate, and I realized that not all have that support system.
I had a great support system going through my education, but like Leanne said, I realized getting into college and graduate school that there really weren't as many women. Where I went to graduate school in my department, there were no women full professors in my department. So that was hard to see sometimes, is that, okay, so you can get to this point and then what? And the higher up you get in these levels of education, it's rare that you see women in these positions of power. It's changing, it's getting there. I always joked with my family that like I was going to be that person that was going to like break those barriers and do those things because I was never going to fit the traditional like 1950s housewife vibe. Like I can't walk in high heels, so I'm never going to vacuum my carpet in high heels when my husband gets home, kind of thing. So I've had those opportunities, and there were definitely a handful of women along the way that were like, yes, go do that, break those barriers. And while it's a challenge, it's something that we need to promote, starting with the younger kids in the community. So I always love when we do these STEM outreach, and there's little girls that love it and want to be scientists and all of that. I'm like, go, do it. Hopefully we'll knock those barriers down for the future generation.
I had a good support system, I guess. So my mom always encouraged me in the science realm, even though she didn't come from a background of science or go to college. She was very supportive of the fact that I wanted to get a higher education, et cetera. I did come from a lower income family, so it did make it difficult for doing those extracurriculars, participating in like after school activities, et cetera. So that was a different barrier that I had to deal with since my school, I went to a public school and we just didn't have a lot of resources in that realm. When I got to college, I actually started off in engineering. So I started off in biomedical engineering, and I wasn't doing so well with math. Math is not my strong suit. But I loved engineering itself and being hands-on and working through a problem. So I ended up switching to biology, and before joining the lab that I worked in for all 4 years, I went to the dean of the college and was like, hey, this is what I want to do. I still want to do this. Is there another alternative route that I could take? And he introduced me to Dr. Jamie Newman at Louisiana Tech, and I met with her, and I had bright blue hair at the time, and she just took a chance on me as a freshman student, and I stayed with her throughout coming to Tulane. And then when I came to Tulane, I've been super fortunate with all the mentors I've had, and one of the reasons why I picked Dr. Engler-Chiurazzi over there is because of her advocacy and outreach, and because she's amazing too. But
Awesome. Speaking on that topic, great tee off. Why do you do outreach? Like, why do you take time away from your teaching, away from the bench, to engage with the community? And what about that do you find so rewarding?
Well, for me, honestly, it's a little bit selfish, but it's just fun. I love to make neurons with little kids. They say the darndest things. Yes, but I think it's important to get out there and to let all kids, regardless of who they are, where they're from, the color of their skin, their gender, whatever it is, to see this science outreach, because oftentimes in our elementary education, all kids love science when they are 4 or 5, because you're playing in the dirt, you're looking for worms, you're wondering about the sun, what's up with rainbows. Like, they have the most interesting questions. And about end of elementary school, middle school, you see a sharp decrease in, science is hard. It's just not for me. And it kills me, because it's like this wonder, this natural wonder that kids have, has somehow been squished. And so for me, if I can go out there and kind of reignite their passion and to show them, to keep asking those questions, that's what lets me sleep well at night, is that I'm trying to let people know that you can be interested in this and you can keep on going. And I'm sorry if your individual school system or your experience has been bad. That's one experience. If you're still interested in it, keep going. So that's why I do it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on that. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Because with these opportunities to engage with any member of the community around you, whether it's kids, whether it's parents, whether it's older adults, young adults, whoever, like, the excitement you see in somebody when you hand them a human brain, like, you can't make that up. Like, and then they touch it, and you're like, the shock and awe you get from people of like being the person that's holding the brain while they're touching it. And I agree, kids come up with the most interesting questions, and they say the most interesting things. Someone was like, oh, this feels like a chicken leg, talking about the human brain. And I'm like, I don't know what chickens you've been touching, but okay. But it's
kind of like a chicken breast, though.
Kind of, yeah, it does kind of have that texture a little bit. The smell, I think, is the tasty. And it's seeing when that clicks with the child, when you're explaining something to them and you see it click, and they just get really excited that they learned something new, and then they run home to their parents like, guess what I learned today? I love having that interaction and just getting that into for kids that may never get the opportunity to learn something like that elsewhere.
Yeah, I think they did a good job explaining it. Partially for me, it's also because I want to give back to the community I grew up in. That's super important to me, especially since I knew that there wasn't a good STEM education in some of the public schools here or in different neighborhoods, et cetera. And so having that representation is important for younger kids to see. I am a biracial individual, so it was always important for me to see diverse groups of individuals for different career paths. I think it's super important for children to be able to see that so they can be like, oh yeah, I can do those things. There's someone that looks like me that can do those things.
Yeah, I love all those motivations, and I'll add one more just on a purely selfish side of it. It is fun, but science can be hard, and it doesn't always go well. And I just love knowing that at the end of a week where maybe an experiment failed, or my paper got rejected, or the funders at the National Institutes of Health failed to appreciate my brilliance and rejected my grant. I can go to an event like this, right? Be in the community, interact with hundreds of families, and know that that's a win. We have had a positive experience with those folks, and it definitely keeps me going for sure. So I think I speak in summarizing what everybody here feels, that what we do is really important and it brings us joy. Okay, turning to maybe one of my last questions for you all before we turn to the floor and maybe start asking you all some questions and starting a dialogue. What do you think that we can do to make neuroscience in particular and science in general more accessible? Because there does seem to be a lot of barriers that people face. There does seem to be, right now especially, an increase in anti-science rhetoric, and sometimes even anti-scientist rhetoric. And so I think this is an important question. What can we as scientists do? And I'm going to ask you all the same thing, so be thinking about your answers.
Yeah, this is a really difficult question, and it's one that I've been thinking out for a while. So what can I personally do, right? So, it's not like it's brain science or anything, right? Right? But that's part of the thing, is that people, especially in neuroscience, right? Like, oh, you study the brain. Oh, that's so hard. You must be so smart. You hear these, and like, okay, I am, but so are you. Okay, it's not that difficult to understand pretty much anything. If you want to understand it, you can. So I think scientists have to do a better job at kind of demystifying what we know and what we don't know a little bit, to encourage more people to do exploration on their own and feel empowered enough to look at scientific results and just wonder, just think about it on your own, right? I think we just need to engage in more Googling. Okay, but directed Googling, critical thinking, right? So don't go to the first website. So in my classes, I'm trying to educate the next generation of students, and I teach critical thinking, but I don't just give that lip service. I have lots of different activities that are specifically designed to get them to question everything, okay? And I'm an authority figure to them, and I say, question me. Okay? I'm not untouchable just because I'm a scientist, and we can have a conversation. So I think scientists being open to have conversations, but also to demystify the process is really important. And that's kind of the whole point of science outreach, right? To let y'all know that there are these things called neurons in your brain, and there's these 4 chemicals that are responsible for everything you do. That's not that hard to learn, right? I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But for the purposes of our argument, that's fine, right? So again, it's just maybe demystifying and as a professor, teaching active critical thinking, not just saying I'm doing it.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we face as scientists is it's really hard for us sometimes to break down what we're doing and explain it to other people. So I think someone was saying this the other day, is like, if you can teach something to a 7-year-old and they can understand what you're saying, then you can teach it to anybody. So I think we need to really step back and make sure that when we're trying to communicate our results to any audience, but definitely an audience that doesn't have our expertise, is explain it in a way that makes sense. Because a lot of times we get so caught up in the nitty-gritty details of what we're doing that we forget that, okay, let's take a step back. What's the big picture of what we're doing, and why are we doing it? And making sure that the people that we're talking to and communicating with understand where we're coming from and that we're honest about what we're saying. I think that's important.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that. Science communication, I think, is the way to go, because you can try explaining using our jargon and they're just gonna be like, oh, okay, cool, and it'll go over their head. But being able to explain what you do in layman's terms is super important for not only them to trust the scientist, but also just to understand the backbone of what's actually happening, maybe to them mentally, maybe to for viruses, etc. And another thing would be to for policymakers. So I am interested in doing science advocacy and policy work, and so being able to explain that to the politicians, you have to just be careful in the language you're using.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, and I want to follow up. Who have you met with on behalf of neuroscience in general and Tulane specifically recently?
So last year I did the Academy of Sciences case workshop, which just taught us about science policy and advocacy, and I met with local people. So met with Steve Scalise, Senator Cassidy, Senator Kennedy, and Troy Carter. And then actually on Tuesday, I met again with some staff members for Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy to vouch for more STEM education as well as more NIH funding for science.
Amazing.
Awesome. Good. Okay, so now I want to turn attention a little bit to you all. So I'm going to do a few demographic checks. First, who in this room is a student of some kind? Hands. Great. Awesome. Okay. Who is college? Okay. High school? Junior high? Okay, great. Who in this room is an educator? Okay. Of those who are educators, what level are you teaching at? Primary school, secondary school, middle school?
High school.
High school, okay, great. University, awesome, okay, fantastic, good. So what have you all experienced when it comes to engaging in STEM education? Have you had good experiences working within the school system and the curriculum? Are there areas that you think can be improved upon? And again, the question of the day, what can we do? How can we do better to communicate the current state of the science, to communicate the topic that we all are really excited about and study every day? What can we do to help you? So I have been asked to advise folks if you want to come and speak, if you could use the microphone, that would be really great. But we'll do our best to make sure everyone has heard what the question was. So let me make a more specific question. Have you faced barriers in talking about science, either within your communities, your classrooms, within your peer groups, and what were those about?
I worked in a profession. I was a scientist and did a lot of communication with business people and lawyers and so on. The main obstacle I ran into is science speaks in the language of uncertainty. And you're talking with people who are trying to impose order on chaos. And so if you never let them get out of that box, they get frustrated with you. I thought Fauci was a great example of it. I said, this guy is talking the language of uncertainty. And there's all these people demanding an answer from him. And he wasn't. You could see him kind of squirreling around it. It's like, he said, we don't know, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I like, there's a physicist, Richard Feynman, who said, I prefer to have questions that can't be answered to answers that can't be questioned. I think that's the big obstacle right there, as far as I can tell.
Awesome. That's a super, super great point. And before I turn it over to the panel to comment, I'll just summarize really fast and make sure I got it correctly. So one of the things that you feel is that communicating that there is uncertainty and imprecision and sort of an unknown aspect about what we do is something that you see as important, but a current barrier within the science communication field.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's the wonderful thing about science and not so wonderful thing about people, right? People want certainty. Science is not about certainty. If you hear a scientist tell you this is the answer, that's their ego talking, okay? So we will always hem and haw because there is always a chance, right? We're never 100% certain. So one of the things that I try to do is that demystifying the scientific process. And, I think Fauci was a good example with masks. Like first, don't wear masks, then wear masks if you're sick, and then wear a mask all the time. And of course, then you heard, oh, these scientists, they don't know anything. But what they were actually doing is they are coming up with a guideline with what they know right then. And then they're going to shift guideline based on new information. So it's not that we don't know what we're talking about. It's this is my best answer at this point in time. But people don't like gray answers, right? They want a black and white. But science isn't black and white. And I don't know how else to let people know that other than that's got to be part of the science curriculum.
I think another important thing to throw in there is the amount of ethical training that comes into the work that we do. So as a scientist, you are ethically required to be honest with the results that you're putting out. In this day and age, it's very much a publish or perish outcome for us on our end. If you don't get out the paper, you don't get out the grant, you don't get out the next thing, there goes your job. And so there is a lot of pressure that comes from the top down because of that. And people may be tempted to then blurry some of their results. And I think that's where some of the trust in science has fallen apart, and that's on us. We need to do better as scientists to make sure that we're being ethically sound in our work. But on the other end of that, the fact that we don't know the answer to all of these questions, or those answers may change as new technologies come out, as new methods are brought up, the other side, the communities that we're communicating our science to, need to understand that as we learn more, that's what we're telling you. It's not that we were wrong back then, but that was what we knew with the methods we had at the time. now that we've gone better, we now know what those improvements are. So we need to be better about allowing people to change their minds as new technologies come around. So I think it comes very much at both sides of scientists need to be ethical and honest about what they're doing, but the community needs to understand that as new methods develop, these ideas that we thought were concrete may change.
Yeah, I think it's become a big issue, especially on social media too, because we have all these like TikTokers that are like, oh, here's my spiel on the science for today, or this topic or that topic. So I think it's important to, like, especially when we're doing outreach, kids will ask like outlandish questions or like really intriguing questions, and they want an answer, but you just have to be like, I don't know, that's a good question. I will go home and then Google it and try to find some papers on it, and like, yeah, there might not be a strict answer to that, but it's okay to let the children or even the adults, like my mom will ask me questions sometimes, like very in deep questions, and I'm like, I have no idea, but we're working on that. Maybe in the next decade we'll have that answer, and so that's important.
Yeah, I think half my PhD period was getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, being on the leading edge of a particular field, and not knowing what would happen when I did an experiment. I maintain that the best but also scariest minutes of my day are when the mouse hovers over the analyze button, because I'm about to know what happened, and I don't know yet. And on the other side of it is the answer, and that's really exciting, but it can be an answer that maybe means I didn't see statistical differences between my group interventions, and that means I probably will not publish this paper, which could affect my career. It could mean that I just discovered the cure for Alzheimer's, which would be rad. It's just a wonderful, exciting moment, and I get to do that every day, which is a privilege. So cool. Okay. What about access? So, show of hands, if you wanted to learn about some topic, some scientific topic, how many folks in this room feel that you have the resources at your disposal to gain a sufficient understanding? Whether it's going to the library or Googling or books or any resources, do you feel like you have that? Okay, so most of you, good. This is more of a comment than a question, which is a very funny typical trope that we have happen at scientific conferences. But I'll turn it to the committee to then also comment on this as well, or other ways to improve access. If you see a scientific paper published, there's an increasing push to make these open access, right? So historically, they were published in scientific journals way back when you only got a hard copy. So if you didn't subscribe, you couldn't have it. They then started going up online, and you could see, the article behind the paywall, and they were like $30 an article, depending, and that's a problem. And now they're becoming open access, and there's some challenges with this, but. Even if you can't access a paper, there is an author block. And in that author block, we all have to disclose who we are. And there is a little symbol at the end of that author block that indicates the corresponding author of that paper. So you can email that person. Their email is right there. And you can reach out and ask questions. If you can't get the paper, you can email us and we will send it to you. Okay? And if you don't get an answer from that person, try again. If you don't get an answer from that person after trying a couple times, Google the next person on that author list. And I imagine you can find their email on publicly available university directories. So that is one way that if you maybe didn't realize, you can talk to us and we want to talk to you. And if people don't, there are people out there who are grumpy, but I would be tickled pink if somebody emailed me and asked about a paper that I had published, because I'm the world's leading expert in that paper. I did all that work. I want to talk about it, so ask me. So to the panel, what are some things that you think folks can do that they might not be aware of to gain access to some of this content?
Yeah, so I would also say, you know, maybe you don't want to read a scientific paper. They're not as fun as some of the books that are here. So if that's not for you, which is totally fine, you know, there are sometimes popular science write-ups of some of these. There's pros and cons of that. But honestly, you were probably looking for a more general-based question than, you know, what's this ion channel? So, and that's cool. But you can use the internet to look at things other than, you know, funny pictures of cats, as I tell my students, right? Like, there's a wealth of information. There are scientists who have blogs. There are organizations that have blogs. There's an Ask a Scientist. Just Google Ask a Scientist. There are people signed up all over the world that are ready to answer your questions. And so there's always a way to get the answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If anybody ever wanted to talk to me about the work that I was doing, I would also be tickled pink. It would bring me so much joy. And I think college students, go up to your professors and ask them about their research. Like, that will make them so happy. And they will share with you more information than you probably ever wanted to know. But you will learn something that you didn't know and that may not be available yet. Like, they're going to tell you the hot off the press, whatever experiment they just finished, what data they just collected, and you're going to be one of the 5 people that know that. And I think that would just increase the ability of everybody to talk to each other. You're increasing the trust in those people. They're going to share the information, and then that's just going to build from there. But yeah, there's resources everywhere, and there's no reason to not learn these things if that's what you want to do.
They have a Neuroscience for Young Minds website, I think is what it's called, and these articles are reviewed by children. So you have to take your research and put it in a way that a child could understand. And I think some of those articles are fantastic because if I'm confused on a technique or a general topic, I go there and I'm like, if they can explain it, then then I'm gonna be able to grasp it. And they also have visuals, which I'm a big visual person. So sometimes they're in like a comic book form, or they'll be in like a little illustration or a little video. So they do have YouTube channels also that are from scientists that use those visual illustrations too, that I think are easier for at least me as someone who learns visually to grasp the information or at least get at a general topic.
Okay, I know we're running short on time. Before I ask if there are any final questions or comments, I do want to give a shameless plug. Dr. Boucher, as well as our outreach team members, will be at the Family Day in the basketball arena tomorrow. We will be there all day. We have brains, we have crafts, we have cool activities, and we encourage you to come and talk to us. There will be some faculty there who are more than happy to talk about their research, and we will be recruiting participants for some studies if you're excited about that. So please check us out. Before we disperse, is there any other question or comment from the audience?
I would like to ask something.
Yes, please.
I just want to know if any of you ever experienced holding Einstein's brain, studying Einstein's brain, or anything being you all into the brain field?
No.
Yeah, so the question
It's
was, have we ever held Einstein's brain or studied Einstein's brain?
There are people who have, and his brain is on display at Harvard Medical School. It's on my bucket list.
I think you can
There's
see
also
his-
the tamping iron from Phineas Gage.
I think you can
talk
see
to
his
you about
MRI
that.
online.
Oh, yeah,
Or
you-
something. It's all available out
You
there.
can
Yeah.
Google that stuff, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm
She
not-
was saying on the program, there's an activity tomorrow.
Yeah, so Family Day takes place in the basketball stadium, and that starts, I believe, at 10 a.m. and goes until 2 p.m. And there won't be just us. There will be many groups presenting about many different topics, but we will be there, and please come say hey and let us know that you were here, and we'll... So the question was, how do
That's not a
we
quick question.
interact with AI as scientists?
I think AI has tremendous benefits for, in particular, medical breakthroughs, because it can churn through a bunch of data and see patterns that us humans can't. So I think from sort of a modeling perspective, AI is going to be really great. But from the writing and idea generation, it's okay, but you're never going to beat this. Not just mine. Right? Everybody's. Not just mine. Yours too, my friend.
On that note, we need to wrap up. Thank you so much to this panel.
Thank you.
Books from authors you hear from today.